Psychology tries to tackle these questions that feel, well, super intuitive, right? Does coffee make you sharper? What really makes people do the things they do? I mean, you're a person, so you should have a pretty good idea. But how do we actually separate what feels true from what is true? Well, that's where it all gets a little messy and a lot more interesting. All right, so let's kick things off with let's call it a very important question. Imagine your friend is staring down a slice of pizza that's been in the fridge for, let's just say, a while. Could eating it actually make him trip? It sounds ridiculous, I know, but stick with me. Because questions like this really get to the heart of how we try to understand the world, and more importantly, why our gut feelings are often the last thing we should trust. And here's the fundamental problem we're up against. Our own intuition, our common sense, isn't just a little unreliable sometimes. It can be completely, totally, flat out wrong. Our brains have these little glitches, these built-in biases that can seriously mislead us, making us feel certain about something when we really don't have a clue. So first up, we've got this thing called hindsight bias. Let's go back to your buddy, we'll call him Bob. Bob eats the funky pizza, and suddenly he's talking to neon green squirrels. You'd immediately say, see, I knew that would happen. But what if he was perfectly fine? You probably would have forgotten all about it. We're brilliant at explaining why something happened after it happened. We're not so great at predicting what will happen next. And then, of course, there's our old friend overconfidence. Oh, we've all been there. You just know you aced that test. You're absolutely positive you know which way to turn. And then you find out you were completely, utterly wrong. The simple fact is, we humans tend to be way more confident than we are correct. On top of that, our brains are basically pattern-seeking missiles. Think about it. You flip a coin. You get tails 5 times in a row. Your brain immediately screams, that's a streak. Something's up. But in reality, that sequence is just as random and just as likely as any other. We are desperate to find meaning and order, even in pure random chance. And that leads to some pretty wild conclusions. So if our own minds are this buggy, how do we ever learn anything real about them? Well, that is exactly why we have the scientific method. It's like a toolkit designed specifically to get around our own biases. It's how we save the study of our minds from our own minds. So how's it work? Well, it usually starts with a theory, a big picture idea that tries to explain something. From that theory, you come up with a very specific, testable prediction. We call that a hypothesis. But here's the real kicker, the part that makes it all work: replication. Can other scientists in other places repeat your experiment and get the same basic result? If they can, then you might really be onto something. Okay, so before you can explain anything, you've got to just, well, describe it. You have to see what's actually happening out there in the world. So psychologists use a few key methods just to observe and record behavior. This is the bedrock that everything else is built on. There are 3 main ways they do this. A case study is where you go super deep on just one person. Now, this can be misleading. It's just one data point after all, but it's awesome for showing us what's possible. Then there's naturalistic observation, which is basically people watching with a purpose. And finally, you've got surveys and interviews where, we just straight up ask people stuff. But asking questions, oh man, it is so tricky. And this slide is the perfect example of why. Look at the difference. Asking if someone supports a ban on something feels way more aggressive than asking if they support limiting it. And come on, space aliens? That brings up images of little green men, while intelligent life sounds much more plausible. The words you choose can completely change the answers you get. And it's not just about what you ask, right? It's also about who you ask. If I want to know what students think about arms control, but I only poll the campus pacifist club, my results are going to be skewed. That's sampling bias. The fix? A random sample. You make sure that absolutely everyone in the group you're studying has an equal shot at being picked. All right, so once you've described some stuff, the next step, naturally, is to start looking for connections. You start to wonder, hey, does this one thing relate to that other thing? This is where we get into the world of correlation. Okay, listen up, because if you only remember one thing from this whole explainer, let it be this. I want you to repeat it after me. Correlation is not causation. Just because 2 things move together does not, I repeat, not mean that one caused the other. This is probably the single most important rule to remember when you hear about any new study. So let's check back in with our friend Bob and his questionable pizza. He eats the pizza. Then he starts having hallucinations. We can see a clear correlation here, right? Eating the funky pizza seems to predict seeing things that aren't there. There's an association. But, and this is a huge but, did the pizza actually cause the hallucinations? We can't say for sure. I mean, what if Bob hadn't slept in 3 days? Or maybe he was about to get a killer migraine, which can cause weird visual stuff. These other possibilities are called confounding variables, and they're the reason correlation can show us a connection, but it can never, ever prove what caused it. So how do we get past this? How do we prove cause and effect?
Well, for that, we need the big guns, the experiment. This is the gold standard because it lets us isolate just one factor, manipulate it, and see what happens. It's how we finally zero in on the real cause.
So an experiment really boils down to 2 key things. First, you have the independent variable. Think of this as the thing you, the scientist, get to mess with and change. It's the potential cause. Then you have the dependent variable. This is what you measure. It's the outcome that might change depending on what you did to the independent variable. It's the potential effect. And to make it all work, you need 2 teams. You've got your experimental group. They're the ones who get the actual treatment you're testing. And then, just as important, you have the control group. They get nothing or maybe a placebo. They're your baseline. By randomly putting people into these 2 groups, you can be pretty confident that any difference you see is because of your experiment, not something else. Okay, that's a lot of theory. Let's make this concrete. Let's run our own little experiment, right here, right now. We want to see if caffeine helps people solve problems faster. So our hypothesis is simple. People given caffeine will solve a maze faster than people who aren't. First step, group 1, our control group. We're going to give them a nice cup of coffee, but plot twist, it's decaf. They're getting 0 milligrams of our independent variable, caffeine. This is our baseline. Next, group 2. This is our first experimental group. They get a real cup of coffee with about 100 milligrams of caffeine, a pretty standard dose. And finally, group 3, our second experimental group. These poor souls are getting a monster dose, 500 milligrams of caffeine. Think multiple energy drinks. We now have 2 different levels of our independent variable to compare against our control. All right, experiment's over. We timed everyone solving a maze. So what happened? Let's look at the results. The 0 milligram group took a certain amount of time. The 100 milligram group, a little bit faster. But the 500 milligram group, whoa, they blew through it. The data here is pretty clear. Our hypothesis is supported. We've shown a cause and effect relationship. More caffeine caused faster maze times. So there you have it. We've gone all the way from our own faulty gut feelings to the powerful tools of science that help us see things a little more clearly. The whole point isn't to prove that we're right. It's to have a system that's okay with being wrong, a system that tests our assumptions. Which leaves me with one last question for you. Now that you have the toolkit, what piece of common sense that you've always believed might not actually be true?